I'm Rachel, this is Missy, and we're Miss Daisy Sewing, and today we're going to talk about Hobbits. Now, I have long missed the bandwagon for Hobbitcore, but I still love the aesthetic. I still love the idea of embracing a Hobbit life, this sort of pastoral quietness and hardworking, but enjoying your food and drink more so. Particularly the food. I can get down with 7 meals a day. So can you, can't you, sweetie? She's like, yes, a minimum of 7, mother. So, on that note, we have a Hobbity holiday coming up. We're going down to North Wales and we'll be living in a little Hobbit hole for a week, which we're very excited about. And I feel that this is my opportunity to finally jump on the Hobbitcore bandwagon and make myself my own Hobbit costume. Now this is the S3127 by Simplicity, and I'm going to do style A and D in the corner here. I'm not quite sure exactly what fabric I want to use for the outside kirtle just yet. I'm going to have a raid in my fabric stash and just see what inspires me. But before that, I do need to go through and draft out the pattern pieces. This time I thought I would get you guys to follow along from start to finish on how we follow a pattern. This one doesn't look too complicated. There is only like 13 pieces in the entire thing. So yeah, let's just start with that, shall we? But first, second breakfast. So I've got here my pattern pieces and my list. I want to make A and D, and basically if I note down the numbers with A or D beside it, I need everything except the ruffles, so I need the first 11 pieces. For a full ensemble, 11 pieces isn't a lot. The chemise pieces were very large, but I managed to just sort of tape together a couple of bits to get that to work, and then it was all of the bodice pieces after that. If you're going to go with the tracing method like I do, it's really important to annotate what all of the pieces are. Trust me, future you will appreciate knowing what's a side front and what's a side back and so on. It's a new day and I've got my fabrics picked out. So for the over part, I've got this sort of browny green corduroy. I know for a fact I have slightly too little of this. So the priority would be cutting out the bodice parts, and then it will be the sort of skirt part, because this is quite a heavyweight fabric. I actually don't want it gathered up too much, so making those panels a little narrower will work in my favour. For the chemise, I've got some white fabric, and I'm actually going to make a second chemise in this sort of really lightweight linen. It is basically see-through. And I want to make a sort of secondary chemise with this one. I did think about flatlining the white with it, but I like the idea of having the separate layers. I think it'll look more flowy and just slightly more elegant. So basically we're going to make 2 chemises, one in the linen, one in the white, and then we've also got the over part. Let's get cutting. Doing the chemise was really a bit of fresh air. I've done a lot of projects recently where I need to do lots of little pieces, so the fact that I managed to construct something effectively from 4 pieces was absolutely fantastic. Great big pieces as well. Because this is a corduroy and therefore has a directional grain, I had to be really careful to make sure that all of the parts were cut the right way round, which is why you can see me lining up all of those bodice bits to start with. I'd actually forgotten that I was going to do the shorter length, so I did in fact have enough of the green corduroy for all of the skirt panels, including enough left over for those vital pockets. Longtime viewers might recognise this fabric. I needed something for the lining, and I just felt this would be really fun and quirky on the bodice. And then onto the overlocking. I'd looked ahead at the pattern and saw that there was no real finish to the inside of the chemise, so I decided to do overlocking to save myself having to do French seams to hide those raw edges. I've got everything here all overlocked now. We've got the chemise, the over chemise, and then all of the parts for the sort of overcoat bit. The pattern starts with the outside piece, but we're just going to start with the chemise today just to get a bit of a slightly quick win project, I suppose. And this is really easy. It's literally attach on the sleeve to the front and back, and then sew up the side seam before we add in the elastic. So I'm just going to get straight onto that. As I said already, the chemise is really quick to assemble and was a perfect quick win to kick off this project. I just repeated the same steps again for the over chemise with that floral fabric, and safe to say, really pleased with it. Although I will confess the initial fitting did have me a little bit perplexed. The plan now is to sew a channel and then insert in the elastic. So I'm going to go and do that on my sleeves and on the neckline. The elastic I've got is probably a bit too wide for the job I need it to do, but I'm trying to just use up odds and ends. So we'll just give it a go and see how it goes. When I say odds and ends, it really is because I'm convinced I'm some kind of crafts dragon who hoards random things, and that includes an entire bag of elastics. I just went with the guides here for trimming my elastic to length. Normally I prefer to actually put it on myself and gauge it based on the sort of feel of the thing, but because I've never made a chemise before, I just sort of went with the recommended lengths and kind of just had to hope for the best. I was very pleased with past me's decision to overlock all of the edges. It made sewing down the channels much easier as I didn't have to double fold and hide raw edges. I could just literally fold and sew. And now the moment of truth, stacking these chemises to see if my vision actually was going to work. I won't lie, I was a little bit concerned about the strength of the elastic on the dress form here. It was really quite stiff, but when I tried it on in person, it's not nearly as tight as it looks. So I've got here all of the parts that make up the lining of the bodice. So we've got centre back, side front, front, times 2. There is going to be boning in this, so I need to make sure I really pay attention to my seam allowance to make space for the boning. And yeah, let's just get on with it. Onto assembly, and although there was quite a number of seams, this did actually sew together really quickly. Our next step is pressing all of those middle seams in preparation for turning them into boning channels, and whilst I do hate pressing, I knew that I couldn't skip this step. There's quite a lot going on with this step. We're going up along, all the way round, and then we're going to go back and do a little casing. So within the seam allowance there, we are going to stitch another little line for the boning. So yeah, let's just give that a go. If that hesitation was not foreboding enough, then I'm really not sure how else to indicate that, of course, I made a big mistake at this point. I'm keeping the footage in because it's very nice, and I also want to include that I took the time to use a contrasting thread here to show you how I'd made this channel and all that wonderful stuff, but allow past me to explain where I went wrong. So I've made a massive boo-boo with this, and I'm going to have to basically take the whole thing apart and start again. I thought I was following on from this page, but managed to accidentally pick up this page. So I've missed steps, where are we at? 7 to 11? Because I was wondering about these shoulder straps. I was like, this doesn't look or feel right. So fun and games, but it's fine. We've caught it early. I'll be able to unpick everything I've done, and the boning bits I've cut I can save. So I'm just going to speed through unpicking this and then going through those missing steps, and I will pick up with yous once I've got back to this step. Fun and games. So saying unpick everything was possibly a little dramatic, but effectively the lining had to come off from the outer bodice. So that was my first step, was getting these two pieces separated. I double checked the steps I had to do because let's not repeat a mistake.
and then double check the boning lengths before sewing in the boning channels that were missing from earlier on. I then inserted the boning into the nice new channels, taking care to leave that little bit of seam allowance, which is why you can see me pulling them back a little bit. And then it was on to the straps, which was actually the giveaway for where I'd gone wrong in the first place. At this point, I'd actually run out of boning, so I was waiting for it to arrive in the post, and I also needed a bit of a quick win on this project and do something successfully, and I knew that was going to be an easy win with these skirts. I've put pockets into side seams 100 times, so this was my next step. Also, proof if you need it that I am trying to improve on my habits, so I did actually press open the seams, partly because these would be visible as there was no lining, but also just to make everything sit a little bit nicer and a little bit neater.
We are finally caught back up to where we were on step 14-15 on this page. One thing I have decided not to follow with the pattern is that they want the skirt put onto the bodice before we attach the lining. This skirt weighs a small ton, and it is going to be really cumbersome to do it that way. That, and I've always attached the skirt last, so it's just easier in my head to do it that way round. From there, we're going to attach the lining again in the same way I did originally, but this time with the boning also in place on the actual thing. One step I wouldn't normally do is attaching these straps to the bodice before attaching the lining. Normally I would just leave that open and wedge it in, but I've already deviated from the step-by-step once and made a bit of a mess, so we're going to give it a try, and if I find it's just getting in the way and being a bit of a pain, I'll just unpick that and do it the way I would intuitively have done it in the first place. But yeah, time to get on with reattaching the lining to the bodice. Take 2.
I will save you from the worst of deja vu, except to say that I placed the lining and the bodice right sides together, repinned it all perfectly neatly, and then stitched all the way around as I described originally. Corners were then clipped, and then I flipped the whole thing round to finally see what it was actually supposed to look like. I'm just pleased I never got this far on my first pass, because if you clip the seam allowance, it does become really hard to stitch it all again together later on. I will confess to another mistake. I forgot to leave open the gaps at the back for where the straps attach back into, so I had to unpick those and then pop them in and top stitch them down. It's safe to say that with this project, hubris caught up on me, and my deviating with a I know roughly what I'm doing was failing big time. I then did a quick fit check because the last thing I wanted to do was attach the skirt to then decide I had to take a side seam or something in, but I'm pleased to say that actually on the first pass I was really pleased with the fit.
So I've put my gathering stitch in on the skirt, that's the 4mm thread length, and what I've done is basically broken it into sections, so the front, middle and back have their own pieces, and that'll allow me to just gather it down a section at a time, and then if I break a thread, it's not the end of the world. I'm not going to have to regather all of this, because there's a lot of skirt here, and it's not got a lot of space to go into. Right. Fingers crossed I don't break the thread.
I'm pleased to report that no threads were breaking as I gathered and gathered and gathered. Then it was to the sewing machine where I stitched all those gathered layers down onto the bodice before we then did a fit check. And I loved how swishy this was actually. Knowing that I was happy with the fit, I then hand stitched down that lining to the skirt piece, tucking in all of those horrible raw edges. I don't have a fancy grommet thing. What I have to do is I use an awl to puncture a hole in the fabric, use a crochet hook to widen it, and then I have this little handheld sort of grommet crusher, which I use to get them all neatly in place. It's a long-winded process, but it works for me. I might invest in one of the sort of smashy grommet things in future, but for now this works. And then it was time to lace it up to get a good idea of how this project was coming together.
So I am really pleased with this. I do think it's really cute. However, I just want to make it a little bit more hobbity. So I'm going to make a little apron to go with it, and it's just going to be a really simple sort of band with just a sort of half apron front, if you will. Might add some more pockets, this is me, and then I think it'll be perfect. So let's just get on with the apron.
Conveniently, I'd made an apron in the past from the Simplicity 122A pattern that you can see me draping on the mannequin here, and this helped me sort of figure out exactly what I was wanting with that half apron look. I'm just going to speed run through the apron here. There was a strap, there was an apron, there was pockets. I might touch this again in another video, but for now, just know I made the apron. I did take the time to do a tiny embroidery on the pocket on the apron, and I just feel it elevates the entire look. Our little Welsh getaway was exactly the detox and chill that I needed. I managed to get lots of time for sewing and just reading, relaxing, and playing some board games. My Hobbit outfit came out beautifully, and I'm not gonna lie, I twirled in this thing so many times. I feel like I've managed to balance that sort of hobbity halfling look and also at the same time create a piece that I can play about with, change up, dress down, and create other looks with, so it's not strictly a one and done costume. There's a few things I would do differently in the assembly of this, but nothing major. It was really fun to assemble and really simple too, so overall, really pleased with this one. But enough of me rambling on. Surely it's now time for 11Cs. We're luncheon? Maybe afternoon tea. How about dinner? Come on, what about some supper? Until next time, cheerio.